To the light, you're in the shadows, Dinis. You're in the shadows, Dinis.
We're in the shadows. I'll try and light in a second. Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in May 2022. And this is going to be a bit of a different session, but it's one of those things that we can do at the summit, which is part of what the summit is really cool. I am joined with my very good friend, Jim Manico, and we go a very long way back on the whole.
Long way back.
And what we thought, this is actually Jim's suggestion, that we should do a session where me and him just bounce off a whole bunch of ideas on Appsec. So here we are. We don't know where he's going to go, but we have a whole bunch of topics and drop questions. And we're going to go down a number of rabbit holes on Appsec. So
let me start with this, Dinis. So I've been recording a lot of videos for my own business. So I got teeth whitening strips on to help make myself more presentable. So sure. I'm really vain today with these Crest whitening strips. I want to start by making fun of myself. It's always a good way to start. How you doing, Dinis?
Good. Let me turn my light on, see if it helps.
Yeah, turn your light on. Don't
there you go.
live in the shadows, Dinis.
There you go. Is that better?
Cool. A little bit.
A little better. Cool.
A little bit.
So, right. So let's go with the first topic of the day. So
okay, threat modeling is unnecessary. What's next? No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
First question, Appsec, actually, what is it, right? So what's your definition of application security?
It's the people, process, and technology necessary to build and maintain secure software. We can play the definition game a lot. Here's another one that I like. Application security happens when you're building and testing software against a strong standard of requirements for security. There's another definition. Here's another definition. When you're building software that does what you want it to do, but nothing else. That's a weak definition. We can look at
the problem with that is the definition of what you want, because also
I don't like that definition, but I see people throw it around a lot. How about this? When you have the processes in place in sync with the BSIM or OpenSAM as an organization in your building, maintaining, testing, and so on of secure software. I can come up with a dozen definitions that are reasonable, but here's the more important question, Dinis. What's your definition, baby? What you got for me?
For me, I think you hit it really well. Right? Is the practices, or the people process technology practice to develop secure applications. And I think applications is important, and especially because the definition of application has grown. And I actually feel that one of the things we have not done very recently is to redefine what we mean by application. Because these days, for me, the application is everything that has code that goes into a live app, which actually goes from Terraform scripts all the way to deployments, all the way to because all of that is the application.
Now take a step back. How many different programming languages are really used to build a web app? We know HTML, JavaScript, let's say Java or .NET or C# and SQL on the back end. But then we got assembly building the operating system, C and C++ building operating system components. We probably have another meta language building the framework. So if you really look at software security, it's 99+% of stuff we have no visibility into, and the actual code we're deploying is a tiny percent of the full software stack. Is that where you're going at, Dinis?
Well, actually, I was more into the fact that it's not just the application these days. Like for example, the deployment pipeline is part of the application, right?
Your YAML scripts now build out your whole infrastructure. It's a YAML file and a couple Terraform scripts and your DevOps scripts that you download from some vendor and run as root inside your infrastructure. Absolutely. Oops.
Yeah.
I got you. It's out of our. The thing is, when I was writing software 20 years ago, I was a full stack developer, and I could really see the whole stack as I was working on it.
Yeah.
Not anymore. Not anymore. There's too many pieces. Things have gotten way too complex. I could barely understand OAuth 2 let alone the whole stack. Things have gotten so complicated.
Yeah, because it goes all the way to the stack. So now, yes, so Petra's saying that basically DevSecOps is under Appsec. And I would say, Petra, absolutely. In fact, Petra, let me bring you in, right? Because you can share.
What did Petra say? What did Petra say?
I let her say that. Petra is a rock star. He's one of those super rising talents. She is. Go on, Petra.
So you're saying DevOps is what? DevOps is what now?
My question was to Dinis, because he said, and you Jim, the question was, you guys were saying that you know, the YAML files, the whole infrastructure, that's all Appsec. So I was saying, well, are you then putting the whole DevSecOps under Appsec? That was my question.
For me, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. DevSecOps, DevOps is primarily continuous integration, continuous deployment with some automation. There's a lot of other stuff around it, but it's just CICD, and they really are the same thing in my opinion. And so it's about automating every aspect of the developer pipeline. And the part we care about from a security point of view is being able to automate security testing. And it's usually done at 4 different areas in the pipeline. Pre-commit hooks, where I'm doing like secrets analysis, then a commit hook, where I'm doing static analysis and third-party library testing that's rapid. Then I'm building the infrastructure, and I'm running scans against all my completed images. Then I'm doing post-production scanning and other testing after I go live and do long-form testing. So all of this is DevOps security testing integration. It is a core part of Appsec.
So does that mean that you expect an Appsec engineer to be basically also a very good DevSecOps engineer?
No, these are usually different specialties. I usually see that.
Know. That's why I'm kind of like...
the promise was, well, they're still a developer though. They're a developer on the infrastructure of software. And if there's a mistake in the DevOps pipeline, I go grab a script. It owns my whole DevOps pipeline. I see all your vulnerabilities and I can push live for you and you're done. So the sensitivity of a complete DevOps pipeline that can push live at the end automatically, that security is integral to development, in some ways even more so because it's critical infrastructure. It's a different kind of developer who works on the pipeline, but they're still a developer and they can still jeopardize the risk of your application in a big way. That's my take on it with respect, Petra.
Okay.
I agree.
Can I go one more, Dennis? Let me do a double header real quick. Here's the other thing, Petra. Everyone's telling you that the DevSecOps is a secret to fix security. That's a crock of bullshit. Here's why. What's number 1 on the OWASP top 10? I think DevOps is a lot of BS and a lot of good stuff, but a lot of BS. And here's why. What is number 1 on the current OWASP top 10? It's access control, broken access control. And how good is the DevOps world at addressing access control assessment? They're not at all, because access control is a business logic domain. I have no idea what your access control policy is supposed to be. So the ZAP, the SEMGREP, all the scanning tools of our day, they're useless at finding access control problems. The number 1 problem in the world today, DevOps addresses it horribly, and yet we still have experts telling you, just go DevOps and all your problems are solved. So I love DevOps. I love the concepts behind it, but I want to understand where the DevOps world is limited so I can use more traditional techniques or more advanced techniques like programming and access control policy into ZAP, so I can actually use DevOps to address the business logic domain. I'd love your thoughts on that, Petra, if that's reasonable to you.
Yeah, thanks. I can totally get behind that, Jim. I can totally get behind that. I agree.
And look, we should know by now that anybody who says X is the solution for security, you know that's already BS, right? Each area has a domain that they need to. All right, so here's the thing, right? So what was it 10, 20 years ago? Can you remember when we started Appsec?
It was all about like DAS scanners for the most part.
Yeah. Well, and it was also about even awareness, right? Like think about it, like 20 years ago, when we started this, like application security was like, most people security thought was just firewalls, right? Like the idea that applications had vulnerabilities, had problems, took a long way to basically, they needed to start being exploited, right? For it to start to pay a lot of attention.
20 years ago, it was like Andrew Vanderstock, Jeff Williams, Dinis, and John Stevens arguing over ports. That was like the totality of the Appsec world 20 years ago. And Chris Weissenpaul, Weissenpaul, Veracode was there. And me as a new guy drinking port, screaming about Appsec, that was like the total community. And yes, it's a bit different now.
Well, that summit we did in Portugal, remember the first one? He still has one of the best security minds in the world today, right? That was.
Oh my God, I want to go back in time to that so bad. Yeah. And by the way, I was like, how dare you, Dinis? You're bringing alcohol. And like, shut up, Jim. Jim, shut up and just show up, and it'll be the best thing ever. And you were right. I still think about, because that to me, that Portugal summit at OWASP. That was my real introduction. That's what I felt like. I went from being an AppSec rando to being a part of the community. So that was a special thing. I always, every time I talk to you, I remind you that you were right and I was wrong, just to pad your ego a little bit. But you were right.
For me, what's interesting about this is that we basically went from a world where we could see the problem, and it was coming, and we could see the stuff that was problematic in a way. And in a way, it took a while, because what I think is interesting is today, AppSec really matters.
More than ever.
I remember being once, again, over drinks with this guy, and we would talk about serious exploits. And there's a moment where he said, when we show these massive vulnerabilities that we discovered, they, deep down, like, think about it, is it really a problem? Because who the hell is exploiting this, right? I remember compromising systems where you then go, but this wasn't that hard sometimes. And you think the only logical reason why this has not been exploited is there's not enough people exploiting these things, right? But that was like
that's not true anymore.
That's not true anymore, right? That's the thing, right? So today you cannot afford to do it wrongly, right? Like AppSec can make or break your company, right?
How about this? Let's look at IBM research. When we found vulnerabilities in open source libraries like 15, 20 years ago, it would take like 45 days for exploits to be seen in the wild, right? It was slow. It was like a month and a half, 2 months. And then we started seeing a few attacks against open source libraries. Now go to Equifax, a vulnerability in struts. 72 hours later, Equifax's network has popped. And then look at yesterday, yesterday, like the John Lennon sense, yesterday seems so far away. All right, look at yesterday, Log4j. When we found out about it, it was under mammoth active exploitation when we first found out about it. So your time to heal is 0. Just looking at third-party library trend data from IBM, boom, Dinis, the world has changed radically.
To one of the things that I feel that, I still feel that there's a level of AppSec that we have barely started to talk about. Which is go on.
I keep interrupting you. Why don't you actually finish a thought and then I'll talk.
So I was saying that I think there's a level of AppSec that we haven't really started talking about, but I feel is also part of the future, again, where we should be also in 10 years or in evolution, is this whole idea that applications also need to start changing their behavior and their security properties based on whether they are under attack, under load, under problem. So the whole safe degradation of the application, it's almost like the application is able to react almost in real time to what actually is happening to itself, like an immune system. Do you know what I mean? And that's the evolution of this sort of, our defenses have to move from being just pure static, pure, do this, do that, and it's there forever, where it's more of a dynamic world that takes into account, for example, the business priorities of that application.
I like that. I think that's a good idea. I don't have a lot of thoughts on it, but that's reasonable.
So because I was involved in a project where we were mapping what was the last man standing, right? So the question was, first of all, which countries can you block? But then we start to go into which functionality, for example, of the application should be alive if you start to have problems. And even simple questions of, okay, so if you have a massive problem with the application, but you have logged in users, and your logged in users are responsible for 80% or 90% of your sales or traffic. If you cannot add new users, at least you still have that, right? Or an application that can start to detect if data is being leaked and then contain some functionality because that functionality is dangerous. So it becomes more of an immune system detection where you still
I love that stuff. I love that. Like I'm really worried. I'm under attack. I'm going to turn off like my payment gateway. I'm going to turn off some critical feature that is being attacked, but let the whole app still run. I've seen that rarely in play. I think it's super useful, especially admin functionality. I want to turn that off. We're under a certain level of active attack. Turn off all admin functionality. It shouldn't even be there in the first place.
Yeah.
How about this though? How about this? I see some groups working on unit testing. I call it organization-wide unit testing.
Yeah.
Like I want to test to make sure when someone leaves the company that we deprovision their account right away. And I can't do that with static analysis or any of the tools of the play. I need to integrate with the HR system to see when someone's let go and map that to an account that I can check periodically to see if it's been revoked or terminated within like 72 hours of their firing, whatever my SLA is. Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of process problems in Appsec that nobody addresses. And I'm starting to see a few folks begin to try to address it. And it's hard. It's like putting agents on everything and collecting full organization-wide data to make these decisions. So that's another interesting area of Appsec that's pushing us forward.
Yeah. So the other one that I would add that I think is interesting is the movement of security to influence the business and the behavior in organizations. So for example, identity access management is an interesting one because we struggle with it, but also so does the business. And the problem is sometimes is that Appsec traditionally is going to push for visibility, for modeling, for graphs, for understanding. But the real value for that is not just security, it's also the business. The business is going to be able to benefit tremendously, for example, with a very solid identity management, because he's actually able to go faster. He's able to share things more effectively in a way, in that principle of low privilege, right? Because the thing about this is that in a business world, if you cannot control your data and your identities, you will slow down the business because you're not able to move at the speed that the business can go. So I actually think that, again, Appsec, or at least the practices that we do in Appsec in 10 years, I feel that are also going to permeate more the business and other areas of technology because it adds value there.
You're worried, wait, I'm not sure if I heard you right. You're worried that Appsec advances in 10 years are going to hurt business needs?
The other round. I think the practices that we do in Appsec, the evolution of it is to add value to the business, add value to engineering, add value to other parts outside of security.
The way that I translate that is I believe that the cloud services we use, the frameworks we use, the languages we use are going to steer more and more towards default security, especially the cloud.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is, like, I have a big need to do data encryption and storage. I get that need and requirement all the time.
Yeah.
But building it is a pain in the ass, Dinis. It's like thousands of hours to really do key management and similar correct. Now go to Azure. I can go, give me a database, give me the Azure key manager, give me a data encrypting key, give me a key encrypting key, and go live, and I'm done. I literally set up database level and cryptography in Azure with a proper key manager and key rotation capability in 60 seconds.
Yeah.
And that trend is going to continue. So when you ask me, how do you think Appsec will enable business in 10 years? And my answer is some of the most difficult to build security components that we need to do today are going to be turnkey tomorrow. So it's just a piece I snap into my app or I enable in the cloud, as opposed to spending 2,000 man hours building it so I can satisfy regulatory and actual security needs. And that just lets the business go lightning fast.
Yeah.
Something that used to take 2,000 hours, that's now 60 seconds. Holy cow, I can move way faster in my business when I have that capability. That's my take on things.
Well, that's the commoditization of the component, right? So basically, that's the worldly maps. These components, which were custom builds, then become products and now become just part of the fabric. So in an interesting way, right? A lot of the Appsec world that we do today should become invisible because it should just happen. It should just be a property of the frameworks of the cloud providers that we are using. Like even identity access management, for example, that should be solved again by a provider, by somebody that provides the object models, the implementations, where you now operate a higher level on the business logic on top of it. So it becomes more invisible because, like you said, those components get commoditized, and then the providers, so then you accelerate, right? It's kind of like that world of the worldly maps where things getting pushed to the right, and then you do higher and higher level systems on top.
I agree. These wide open, insecure frameworks by default, like struts, they're done. Even Spring is in that category. It takes way too much to lock down Spring. Yeah. But some of the AWS and Azure stuff has a lot of security built in from scratch with minimal work. That's the future, where anything that's wide open and requires great expertise to lock down, that needs to go. Anything that I can flip on and have mature security capability by default, that's the future that will enable business in 10 years. That's my take.
Yeah. Quick thoughts on OWASP top 10.
What do you think the OWASP top 10 is for? Let me ask you this question first. What is the purpose of the OWASP top 10 in your mind, Dinis?
For me, is awareness and alignment.
That's it. Good enough. It's basic awareness.
Yeah.
Should you use the OWASP top 10 for comprehensive training? No. Yeah. Should you use the OWASP top 10 to base an entire Appsec program off of, like the Canadian government does? No. Yeah. Should you use the OWASP top 10 as a base resource for code review or security testing? No. Should you use the OWASP top 10 for a conference talk or for basic awareness? Yes. So if we understand what the OWASP top 10 is, basic awareness, I think it's excellent. It's great. It's compelling. And no, they're not all risks. It's a messy list, but we don't need to be clean when you're doing basic awareness. Yeah. And so for what it is, a conference talk, it's great. And it got, you know why I like the controversy? Because the controversy is insecure design and a couple and server-side request forgery and a few others. Yeah. The controversy got tens of thousands of people talking about Appsec. Yeah. And for me, like, I'm delivering an entire commercial course on the OWASP top 10 because the current state ones out there are horrible. And so I like the OWASP top 10. It's good for my training. It's good for my business. It's good for conference talks. It's an excellent basis for conversation among other experts. It's something I can monetize because it's cited in PCI DSS, the Defense Department STIGs, it's cited in the FTC. So even though it's limited in its capacity, in my world, it's awesome. But if you're trying to use, right? if you're trying to use it for a standard, it's horrible.
Of course. And I think it's important to understand that OWASP top 10 was the first thing that really hit on Appsec.
2003, right? 2003. Yes.
And I think we have to say that at that moment in time, it made a massive difference. And
yes.
if you're on evolution, it's like if you have 0, OWASP top 10 is a great evolution. The problem is that it's the first of many, many, many steps. And and the OWASP top 10 is like, if the bar is OWASP top 10, basically you're doing AppSec circa 2005, right?
Yeah, I agree.
That was the state of the art in 2005.
I agree.
Right.
Now we got ASVS. We have a lot of North American standards. We have European standards on certificate cryptography with banks, and we have so many other mature standards. We don't need the OWASP top 10 anymore. I agree with you. I agree with Dennis Cruz. I agree with Dennis Cruz. Jim Manico. Someone tweet this. I agree with Dennis Cruz, Jim Manico. And go ahead, tweet that out. I'm at Manico on Twitter.
That's right. We've been doing it on the top 10.
Yeah, no. Sorry, Jim. I was just agreeing. I was just saying no when Jim was saying about should we use OWASP top 10 as a standard in application security?
No.
Yeah, exactly.
No. But
I like your answer.
but
The
you see
primal
the-
scream of no, please don't make my job harder. Don't do it.
exactly.
I'm with you, Petra.
Cool.
I'm with you, Petra.
Now here's a very good one, right? ASVS. See,
Yes.
which is the application security verification standard. Now, this is a hell of a document, right? Now we're talking, right?
I'm one of the co-leads of this document. I've been working on it for several years with Elar Lang, Joshua Grossman, and Daniel Cuthbert. The four of us are the standard leads right now. And we're leapfrogging off the original work of Jeff Williams, Dave Wickers, Mike Babursky, and the original team from like 15 years ago.
Yep.
We're on version 4.03, working on a full rewrite for version 5.0, which will occur at the end of the year, is what we think.
Yeah. And I
think you should fork AS. I don't think as a standard, I don't really think of it as a standard. I think of it as a collection of requirements that you should fork off of for your team. So I see it a bit different. It's kind of a standard, but it is comprehensive. It's comprehensive.
So I got into a lot of trouble in the past for really having a bit of an issue with the standard word. And I'm with you, Jim. I think this should be requirement, not standard. I think
it should be application security. It's ASVR. It's the ASVR to me. Application security verification requirements.
And like you said, it should be forked.
It's no standard.
It should be forked.
Yes.
In context. So
because of that, calling it a standard is a little bit off base, but it's a standard. Yeah, it's a standard set of requirements to fork off of.
but I feel that the future is here. Like when we look at the OS top 10, that's not the future. But the future,
no.
The idea of having requirements, the idea of having security verification requirements is the future, especially if you can tie in with automation, because that's when you get a hell of a system where you can define the requirements. You can then say how you test it, how you test automatically, how do you know that you are in or out of a requirement in a continuous way, and ideally, how do you allow consumers to have access to that, so you create an economic model that rewards the companies that delivered it well.
I'll tell you this though, Dinis, before I was a co-lead of the project, I felt that building security requirements was easy. Now that I've been doing it for several years, it is brutally difficult to have a comprehensive generic list of requirements for Appsec. And like the amount of arguing that we do with each other among like experts is more than I expected, because wordsmithing these requirements is brutally difficult. We have to be concise. These are not long requirements, a couple of sentences. And I just want you to know, it's a lot harder work than I expected. And there's a lot of people participating, helping us fine tune it. And I've learned more about Appsec doing ASVS than anything else, because it's so meticulous. I love it though.
And I think is the evolution of security teams, right? Like when you start to be able to have the requirements and or a standard for a company is how you scale, because now you can compare yourself against the standard. And again, you can create that economic model or that gamification to making sure that in an interesting way, if you tie in with the idea that we talked before of moving things to productization and cloud or systems, you want a model where you go, hey, look, you can do this from scratch, and here's the 25 ASVS things you need to do, or you use that module and you get all of that for free. Now you pick. Do you know what I mean? That's the economic model, right? Like you do the component, you get that stuff. You get that component, you get that stuff. So then you only have to match that requirement, because all these others are provided by the cloud provider, framework you're using, the integration you're using. That's a great economic model.
I'm with you. Here's the problem of ASVS. Here's where things get weird. One of our requirements is in the authentication section, it says, look, if you're going to generate a one-time password, please use a symmetric key or similar in a hardware security module. Holy cow, how many requirements is that? The key management requirements, the using the right crypto algorithm, just that one ASVS requirement, if I had to break it down to a work plan, it'd be like another 50 requirements. So the question is, how deep down the rabbit hole do you want to go? The deeper you go down the rabbit hole, the more the requirements are going to expand to tens of thousands of requirements. We have like 300 or so top level requirements that are going to require some understanding to like implement. So just the point I'm trying to make, Dennis, is to really come up with security requirements for detailed software development is way more difficult than I ever anticipated. And it's like,
it hasn't been done, man. There's a reason why.
well, we're doing it. We're doing it.
We're doing it.
It's just hard. It's hard. It's hard. That's all.
But I actually think that context and that zoom is needed. The difference is,
I agree.
In most applications, the logic is that you only zoom on the bits that you care, and the other ones, ideally, you get from the platform. So it's not like everybody has to do 300 requirements. You might need to do 25, but for those, you need to zoom in, and that's where you get the context. And sometimes the context will be application or company specific, because then you say, well, in this company, we use this, this, and this. So at that moment in time, you want the developer to use whatever that framework or whatever that system was done in that company versus something else.
This is the worst webinar ever because you and I are just agreeing on everything. What's happened to us, Dinis? We used to disagree on everything, and now we agree on everything. I think we're getting old.
All right. So the cheat sheets is
Hey, let me ask you a question. Are you still walking around banks in bare feet? Do you still do that?
Yeah, quite a lot. I got injured on my ankle, so I'm doing a bit less than I used to. But I injured my calf.
What happened to your ankles? What happened? Just from running too much?
It's like, it's telling old age, right? It's like, I don't know, I got nothing.
I folded one of my ankles over, and after like 10 years, it still hasn't healed. So I started wearing an ankle brace when I lift weights or do yoga.
It's good for that. So barefoot, it's actually the Achilles heel is the heel that that's a tough one.
All right. Cheat sheets. Go ahead.
So I actually think the cheat sheets, again, it's one of the OWASP amazing gems, right? It's an amazing resource.
I love it.
Super sheet. And again, it should be forked for the companies, right? We need this model where you go, put that into context for what matters and then share it internally, right?
Absolutely.
All right.
The cheat sheets, I project manage the cheat sheets with Jacob Markowski. Yeah. We have hundreds of people who are helping us edit. I get PRs every day that I'm merging, things like spelling errors or please clarify this sentence or here's a whole new cheat sheet. And it's a joy to work on that. Like early on, 20 years ago, I saw several cheat sheets get written by, again, Jeff Williams did XSS and Eric Sheridan did CSRF. Those two cheat sheets have been fully rewritten. But when they first wrote it, I'm like, we got to add this to a project. So I grabbed those two cheat sheets, wrote a few others, and that kicked off the project. 15 years later, I'm still editing. I'm still managing it because that's how I learn as well from all these edits coming in. Cool. It's a living encyclopedia of Appsec knowledge that I encourage everyone to read.
I completely agree. Right. So identity access management, right? So for me, what's interesting about this problem is that the solution for this, part of it is into a world that I'm really into, which is graphs, which I think is an area that we have not explored enough. Because fundamentally, we need to create graphs, which is representations of the model that exists and the roles on it and how everything fits together. And then we actually need to apply the equivalent of static analysis rules and ideally dynamic analysis rules and even interactive rules on top of that model. So the identity access management, I remember having this paradigm shift where I realized that the world created by the roles and the users and the access and the assets and who has access to what, etc., was almost as complex as code itself.
Tell me that, go back a sentence. I'm not sure if I fully grabbed that. One more time, Dennis, I'm sorry.
So basically, the identity access management, which fundamentally is the mapping of the roles and the users and the access that you're supposed to have. And the assets
okay, I got you.
All of that is basically a gigantic graph, right? But then when you have that graph, the analysis of that needs the equivalent of static analysis because a vulnerability actually becomes, it gets to the point where humanly it's not possible to understand those permutations. You have to start codifying what you want almost in a meta language that allows you to say, this is what I want. Like a good example is AWS Identity Access Management. It's insanely hard to make sure that you only have the right access for the right things. Because you want to say, I want to give access to this, this, and this. The mapping of that in identity access in IAM rules can be massive, and you can be creating a huge amount of vulnerabilities because you want to give access to this. But you can't give access
I agree. Now go back a step. Identity and access management are two separate things. Identity establishment, authentication, and session management, and then access control. Let's go to identity. That's a solved issue now. And bear with me, and I go down this road. I can use an identity provider, and this is why the problems with authentication are decreasing. Because we're not building it from scratch anymore. We have identity providers. So I'm gonna take identity out of it. You're talking about access control now. And remember, Dinis, access control is #1 on the OWASP top 10, whether you like it or not. And this is because we have not solved this problem like we solved identity. That's solved with the ping, Okta, Auth0, whatever of the world. But access control, no one's got an enterprise access control product that I can slap into my app and solve that problem.
I agree.
Because the frameworks today, the access control and the main frameworks are mostly hard-coded role-based, and that's terrible access control. Roles should be on the back-end database, not as enforcement points in code. That's weak. When we don't, and things like indirect object reference, where I want to have data-specific access control. Something as simple as a message ID should only be viewed by the author or recipient of that message. Roles don't handle that. Our frameworks barely handle that. So now we're forced to custom build this stuff from scratch. And how do most people custom building it? They custom build it by scattering checks all over the code, and that's not provable. So take a step back. When you want to build enterprise access control, you should probably use something like OPA in your cloud infrastructure to pass these rules to all your microservices or similar. #1, OPA is like an access control rule distribution framework. And then on top of that, you should build a data-driven access control MEC policy. So it's not in the code, it's in your database. And then as folks make requests into your system, you know the feature based on the URL, you look up the policy in the database and make a decision. And that database of policy information needs to be manageable by an admin, by admin screens. And I got to handle problems like multi-tenancy, data-specific access control, grouping. Dinis, the point I'm making is you got to build access control by yourself, #1. And #2, it's so hard to prove. It's so difficult to handle advanced access control needs. It's so hard to verify access control because I got to, like you're saying, I need a meta language to program in my policy. These are all reasons why access control is #1 on the OWASP top 10. It's not a solved problem. It's going to bite us for years.
Yeah, if anybody, for the ones, listening on this, right? There's a great area of research, right? If you want to really get into the areas of application security, this is the world. And it's all, for me, it's about graphs, right? Like we don't think enough in graphs. I agree. And actually,
it's more than graphs, though. It's more than graphs.
The graphs is the beginning, also, right? The graphs is the foundation.
It's also data, but it's also data-specific rules. Like ID 137 of this message is for Jim and Dinis only. 138 is for Fred. 139 is for Petra and Jim. And like, whatever. I can't codify these rules easily at all. Not in a meta language. I need to inspect the access control database, make it visible, and have a business person verify that I got this right. And for you to hammer on this, Dinis, I'm with you. This is still gonna be a problem years from now. It's not going away.
So the model you were describing is, and I remember once having this massive, debate with a couple of architects where we were talking about where to do the access control. And I was saying, as deep as possible, as close to the data as possible. Because if you do that,
database,
then exactly, or the service, right? You can have a service,
or the data level API, not the front level, but the back end data API. That's the most important place to propagate the JOT, verify the identity, and do the access control. And everyone skips it and has a dumb pipe and does it at the web server level. And that is the biggest architectural mistake when it comes to web services, access control. And once again, I agree with Dinis, Cruz, Jim Manico. You can quote me on that.
So-
I'm with you. I'm with you.
So I think we covered this one, because the thing I want to talk about cloud security is how this is really how we scale, right? Like the more the cloud providers, or the more the in a way these new frameworks are able to give us a lot of the security functions, the more we get security, right? And the more we actually are able to implement a lot of these security practices.
Okay.
So, but the one I wanted to spend a bit of time with you is this one, CICD pipelines, right?
Okay.
Because
all right,
I feel that this is an area that we push this because, for example, we needed to put security to shift security left, but a good CICD pipeline, I would say, is one of the biggest signals of an application today to actually almost to be able to be secure. Because
I agree. I love
because
it.
the better your pipeline, the more you can push fixes, the more you can push changes, the more you can add security controls in a scalable way.
The more you can minimize the exposure of security problems when you can actually deploy live quick. I don't think you're doing DevOps unless, as a developer, I can check in code and it goes live immediately after I pass the gauntlet. So now you're doing DevOps.
So now here's an interesting question. If you only had X credits to spend for Appsec, right, in a development environment, and you could only choose between, let's say, do some more code review, do some security activities on the code, or help to build a better CI pipeline, where would you put your chips?
I go pipeline. That's one of the first things I want to build out in my Appsec program, almost as early as possible. And it depends what you say DevOps is, though. To me, DevOps is at the time of code commit, I'm not allowed to merge my commit, my PR, until I pass security testing. And if you agree with that, then you're doing DevOps, and I'm with you. That takes a lot of fine tuning.
Because my point there is that without the pipeline, that statement that you just said is not even possible, right? Yep. Without a decent pipeline, I don't have a place to put that pre-commit checks. I don't have a place to put my automation, right? But you know what's interesting about that sequence of events is that from a security practice, it means that we sometimes should think not how many security practices can I implement for example, in a team, but can I help to build a pipeline, right? Which is a different approach, right? Because sometimes it's easy to say, oh, I'm Appsec, I'm going to be doing these Appsec practices, and I am actually arguing that helping the CI pipeline, which is almost a pure DevOps or pure development engineering practice, gives us a much bigger yield than other traditional Appsec practices.
But here's the thing, though, Dinis, you don't need to build pipelines from scratch anymore.
Oh,
one of the flagship projects from OWASP is a project called the Defect Dojo. This is a full DevOps testing harness framework and CICD pipeline that's really well built. One of the commercial entities is a company called 10 Security that provides professional services on top of that, which I've invested in heavily, right? I love this company. So I love DevOps to the point where I'm investing in some of the leading DevOps companies. I help advise them. It's not because I believe in what they're doing. And I think in building a DevOps pipeline, one of the first things I want to do in maturing an Appsec program. I'm with you. I agree with you again.
Cool.
Damn it.
So I had a couple here, which definitely we could have, talk a bit. I asked, but I think this is more interesting, right?
I agree.
Policy as code, right?
What else you got? I'm eating European cheese right now.
Right.
I'm starving. I'm sorry.
So is policy as code? This is also part of Appsec, right?
Oh, Dinis, look at that. Look at that beautiful European cheese.
You're making me jealous now, man.
Isn't that gorgeous? Oh my God.
Right.
I got thin slices.
What's your views of policy as code?
I have no views.
Well, I think it's very. This is another way to scale.
Educate me on this. What am I going to learn from you today? What do you mean by policy as code?
Well, it means that you start to treat your policy, your rules, your your mappings of basically what happens on top of your frameworks as code itself.
Give me an example.
So, when we talk about access management, right? So the access
Yeah.
management, there's going to be a whole number of rules that determine the
Yep.
behavior of the access management system that you build. That these days starts to be code. That needs to be tracked.
I don't want that as code. I want that in my database. So it's because I need to modify policy information a lot.
Yeah,
So I'd
but
rather like the framework they codify access control rules in software. I don't like that. I want to see my access control rules in a manageable database because I got to change it so often. But I'm splitting hairs with you. I'm with you, Dennis.
yeah, because the idea here is that, so I guess the code, the work code here is that it should be something that is measurable. It should be something that we version control.
Yes.
So it should be something
Yes.
that it almost becomes immutable in a sense that you change it as part of your pipelines, not people clicking, right? And then
All right.
not leaving anything behind, right? Because think about code today is not just the code you write. Your YAML files start to be part of your code.
Scripts, your DevOps scripts.
Exactly, right?
Your background cron jobs,
Yeah.
all that stuff matters.
Exactly, right? So that, and again, the security practice that we do need to be codified. They have to be, so, think about it. When we talk about putting security in the pipeline, we're now writing our security checks and activities and behaviors as code or configuration that now are part of almost, again, the application space.
I'm with you. That seems like a real basic idea. I agree with you. What else you got for me?
What about, I think this is a massive big one, right? Visualization
Yeah.
of code, right?
What's that?
Visualization for code. I feel that
Yeah.
today, and there's an amazing presentation by Brett Victor, which is an amazing guy. And he talks about how the idea of writing code sequentially, it's so primitive that hopefully in the future, that's not how we do it. And we're still doing that today, right? But the idea is that we should be able to visualize the code, because once you can visualize the code even as graphs, a lot of those security properties become very apparent. So this is the thing that I got really massive when I was doing a lot of static analysis, because I was able to visualize the code in the O2 platform, right? And then suddenly I realized that a lot of the security properties that we have are almost apparent once you can visualize the code, the patterns. Like, for example, like if I showed you a gigantic normalized graph and I said, where are the access control decisions being made in this graph? If they're all here, we have a good system. If they sprinkle left, right, and center, we have a problem, right?
Interesting.
If you are able to connect the dots and start to say, here's the flow of data, here's who has access to the data, here's who can modify the data, here are the assets flying through my systems across the multiple parts, right? You get a much better understanding of the problems, and you get a much better understanding of bugs, but also security vulnerabilities.
I would put this in my mind as a specialized form of threat modeling, more technical threat modeling. But I see no problem with it.
Well,
What's
threat
threat
model will
modeling?
start here, right? Imagine a threat model that starts,
Yeah.
here's what exists.
Yeah.
Instead of having people going, here's what I think it does, imagine a threat
Here's
model.
what it actually does. Yeah.
Here's
So
what
I
it
would say
actually does, right?
this is like mature. This is mature. I got to stop eating the cheese. I'm cheesed out. I gotta. It's a specialized form of technical threat modeling, which is the trend.
Yeah.
The idea that you just go to a whiteboard and draw stuff with people, that's dead. That's over
the
with.
first
That's 2005.
Exactly.
That's show
right?
stack 2005. stuff,
Exactly.
right?
Right. Now, I feel this is one of the massive blind spots that I see today, which is that we don't have unit and integration tests for Terraform
I
and
agree.
Helm chart.
I agree.
It's like insane. They go, oh,
100%.
I don't need to test because it's
100%.
relative security. It's like,
Hell yes.
So, but can you see that this becomes code? So we now almost need to start to have static analysis and dynamic analysis for these Terraform scripts.
Damn straight. Static analysis mostly.
Yeah, and you need rules for it, right? Because the matter, it's powerful, but you can also do lots of stuff wrong, right? So
It's there.
I completely agree with you, right? Now, how do we solve this?
I don't want that solved because then my rates go down. So I'm
That's
okay
not
with this.
true. Your rate's always going to go up because of your expertise. So
I'm okay with Appsec talent shortage. I'm okay with that.
So
It
there we
makes
disagree.
no. Okay, it's easy. It's easy, Dennis. Pull your security-centric developers and make them security champions and make them liaison between security and developers. That's usually how this is best solved, by having a security champion program and actually taking it seriously. The best presentation on security champions was from Chris Eng out of Veracode. Because they take this very seriously with data and metrics. So I like Appsec talent shortage. Security champion program is my best answer to it.
Yeah.
Because he can't hire these people. They don't exist.
Yeah.
I get asked 3 times a week, can you help my company find an Appsec leader? And I'm like, absolutely I can. That's $100,000 up front for that search. So what? I'm like, oh, go ask a recruiter to go find you a senior Appsec person. They're going to ask for 200 grand, 300 grand just to find that person. And so people ask me, like, hey, can we find Appsec people? Oh, I provide that service. You want me to be a professional executive level technical security recruiter for you? That will be $100,000, whether I succeed or not. And then they usually go away. Not always. I got a few of those gigs, but they go away. And they're like, that's kind of rude, Jim. I'm like, wait a second. You asked me to do a free service for you that's valued at 6 figures and you're calling me rude? I quoted you the actual industry price. Maybe asking me to do mammoth free work for you, maybe that's the rude thing, because finding Appsec people for big companies, for any company, is number 1, brutally difficult. Number 2, it's time consuming. And 3, it's expensive if you hire a real professional to help you do
touched,
it.
I think, on the solution already, right? The solution is to find good engineers and make them Appsec engineers.
Yes, Petra.
Right? Because it's the whole thing, right? There's this guy who said he was doing a movie about basketball, and he realized that instead of teaching actors how to play basketball, it was easy to take basketball players and teach them And I think the way we solve this problem, but also the way we solve diversity and lateral movement, is to find engineers and which actually are already suited for that particular technology, and then make them Appsec engineers. And I think that's, because to be fair, a good engineer already has all the properties that you want to see in Appsec.
Yeah.
Right. So
the era of needing Appsec people who don't write code is over, in my opinion. And I get a lot of trouble for saying this, but you got at this point.
I was there, man. I used to say Appsec, we can't code. That's it. I'm like, oh.
No, I hurt the feelings of a lot of Appsec people who were friends of mine when I went in this rant, because my rant was, you need to code, learn how to code, or know a little bit about coding. And if you really know nothing about coding, then your value as an Appsec professional is diminished. Yeah. Yes, you could be a manager or do governance, but really we need people who understand coding in the world of Appsec. And I'm not saying that to be mean or disrespectful. It's just the truth of what we're facing today in the industry.
Absolutely.
So I need my Appsec people to write code. I need my coders to learn some Appsec. And yeah, Petra, hiring Appsec engineers is really difficult. Raising up your own security champions is, I think, a lot more doable. Yeah. In fact, a lot of times the best security champion is not the best developer. It's someone who sees outside the box and has done a little study in this area. So I've taken junior engineers who weren't the greatest. They're okay. They can sling some software. But in the world of security, they were rock stars because they just got it. So it's a chance to take other developers who may not be as productive and make them a lot more productive by giving them a different industry to work in. So
yeah.
If your security champion doesn't get time to work on security, then they are not a security champion, right? They are not. They are just a developer with the fancy label. Security champions in a more formal program are given dedicated tasks to do Appsec properly, and like triaging bone reports or communicating standards or doing training. So
more importantly,
I agree with Petra.
Yeah,
Petra's spot on.
And more importantly, they once they have that, they need to now be accountable, but also needs to be part of their bonus program, their reward system. They have to have real recognition for that work.
I think that's
Here's the other hard part. Go ahead, Petra. I'm sorry.
I think that's the main issue because, yeah, because I'm in the dark now too. That's the main issue. The companies a lot of times won't give them rewards, won't give them bonuses to work in security. They will give them the title, but they won't give them the rewards. And then it's especially small companies. And then it's so hard to get them motivated.
No program.
Why would
but then you don't have, you're right. You will lose your program, right?
Yeah,
Your program
exactly.
won't scale, right? Because the problem is that if you have somebody that has 10 priorities in the next quarter and security is not one of those priorities, then even if they do a lot of security, they might even not, they might even do a bad job, right? So almost like it's a double negative for them.
Yeah, agreed. It's a struggle.
Yeah.
Take a look at Chris Ng's presentation on security champions and what their duties should be. It's not enough to have a security champion title program. That's where you give people titles. You need to have an actual security champion program where you have security tasks done by security-centric developers. So I hear you, Petra.
Yeah. I need to find that presentation. Yeah, is that building a security champion program to scale? Cool. Right.
Yeah.
Jim, last.
All right,
last
Dinis,
minute.
I'm fading. What do you got?
Final thoughts.
Seriously, I like it how after years of us studying on our own, and we cycle back once in a while, we're seeing a lot of things in alignment after many years, and that's good, Dinis. So maybe our age, wisdom, and experience is starting to sink in the same place. I'm glad that we're seeing things the same way, and I really enjoyed talking with you today. That's my final thought.
Yeah, and I like the fact that it's a lot more real now, right? I think, to be honest, I think the reason why we could afford the degree was because, being brutal, some of the opinions didn't really matter because there wasn't that much consequence of that. Where I think now that we actually have, oh, look, your green screen.
I'm fixing my green screen here. Sorry. I'm gonna record later today. There we go. Look better.
Now that we actually know this thing has to work.
Green screen down. Green screen down, Dinis. We'll fix it later.
So I think, but I think it's also a super exciting field, right? I feel that it's still, there's still lots to do, right? It's definitely an area that, we probably are halfway or a third way in of where we need to be. So it's still very exciting to be part of this journey.
I really agree. I still love what I do. I still study and do my due diligence, and it's a pleasure to do it, to be in this industry. And I feel like as an educator, I get a real sweet role. I love what I do, and I'm grateful to OWASP, to you, and to all the community members who care about Appsec, who've helped me along the way. So life is good, Dinis.
Very brilliant, man. Cool.